still some really ugly stuff, but we need to try everything when it comes to being all in to win. I was heartened by the news that we're trying to negotiate, try everything to release Brittany Griner and the former Marine Paul Whelan, the 2 Americans in prison in Russia. And I hope that happens because, again, when we're talking about try everything from getting that climate package passed, woo, that could be happen, unbelievable. And then the unbelievable with the PACT Act that, if you all noticed, did not pass. It was quite just disturbing to see that happening. And we need to do everything to secure women's reproductive rights, protect voting rights, and expand everything. That may be, getting rid of the filibusters. So much is at stake. So nothing should be off the table. So let's get down to business together. I'm Catherine White, the host of the weekly Friday Power Lunch, the show bringing you the guests, the issues, the action, all in one big room. We are the voice of the grassroots. We amplify them to get things done and, of course, to make politics fun. Believe it or not, it's July 29th, and you are on the Friday Power Lunch. We have an excellent show and great guests today to unpack this theme about women in policing, representation, and reform matter, because yes, it does. We know that being represented everywhere definitely makes a difference, because we have, been witness over this last year or two that simple traffic stops resulting in the death of citizens, especially in the Black and brown communities. When we saw the public murder of George Floyd, that broke the dam of really outrage across this country, that led to the calls for so many reforms and also culture change within law enforcement and in policy, that we have had some successes. And obviously we've had some disappointments as well, some backsliding on this. But today we really love to bring the positive and looking at solutions and different ways to try everything to make some change in those areas. So I'm so excited that we will be talking about how we're changing this with increasing women in law enforcement. And across the country, we see police departments trying that with hiring more women. So does it work? Well, let's talk about that today. So first up, I'm excited to get to our first guest, MAUREEN MCGOUGH. And today I'm in charge of spotlighting. Look, I did pretty good, and letting people in the room. Hello, MAUREEN, how are you doing today?
Hi there, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I didn't do a really good job at introducing you. You're the Director of Strategic Initiatives at the Policy Project at the New York University School at the university. And so are you in New York right now?
I'm actually in Woodstock, Virginia. So I'm only up in New York a couple times a month. But yeah, it's the Policing Project at NYU Law School. And I'm also the co-founder of 30 by 30 to advance women in policing.
Yeah. Oh, great. Well, we're excited to unpack this with you today, and I'm glad you're doing well. And you just said you moved. Are you moving into a new location or?
I am, yeah. So I'm one of those digital nomad folks who had always worked in an office, and the pandemic changed everything. So had the option to get out of the big city and into the woods. So here I am.
So you're in Woodstock. We have friends in Woodstock.
Oh, nice.
Huddle. We have some activists over there. So we'll have to connect you with some great women over in Woodstock.
That sounds absolutely wonderful. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Well, we're looking forward to your discussion today. So thank you for being here. And next up on the docket, we have Major THEA PIRNAT, and she is the commander of the Fairfax County Police Department Resource Management Bureau, and an awesome person. And then again, I'm charging a spotlighting, so I'm going to get over to her. THEA. Hello, THEA.
Hi, how are you? Thanks for having me today. This is a great opportunity to have an open dialogue about why it's important to recruit and retain women. And I'm going to talk about what we've done with the 30 by 30 initiative and some other steps that the Fairfax County Police Department is taking, as are other agencies, to make sure that women come into this profession and are a part of the change.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. You're bringing it already. I love that you're prepared. I love the background of the black and white photo. So you've come prepared. So we're excited to unpack that conversation with you. THEA, thank you for being here. And let's also get to next up. This conversation cannot be complete when we talk about policy and policy reform and where that makes a difference. So I'm excited here today to have Senator Dave Marsden on, and he is my senator. Let me find you, Dave, over here. Okay. Oh, there you are. Wait till Robin watches this recording. Hi, Senator. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you, Catherine. And it's exciting to do this program. I have such a long history because I've been around for a long time. I started at the juvenile court in 1970, dealing with police officers every day and watching female police officers be brought on to the Fairfax County Police Department. And I think the first one we had was in 1957. And
Really?
but it was watching that process and then running our detention center and bringing women into the previously mostly all male world of corrections, and then at the Department of Juvenile Justice under Governors Gilmore and Warner, running that 8 correctional facility system where women became a larger and larger part every year of both the management of the facilities and the direct contact with the youth.
Nice. And one thing I'll say to give you the kudos is that you brought this idea to our team, and we're so happy that you have Senator Locke, and I'm going to put her up there. Hello, Senator Locke. How are you doing?
I am great. I'm so happy to be with you all today and to talk a little bit about criminal justice and racial equity, our agenda that we had a couple of years ago that's brought a lot of reform to the Commonwealth. So thank you so much for having me here today.
Yeah, excited to see you here too. And I was saying in the back green room that you are a trailblazer, making just so much history and working on this really crucial reform to policing and other areas of racial equity, and got at the table with the Vice President Kamala Harris. How was that?
Oh, that was fantastic. It was amazing, particularly when we kicked the reporters out of the room. So we could have some real talk.
Some real talk at the table. That looked like one power table. And later, I would love to talk to you when we're talking about representation matters, that in the Senate, how many women are there? Like, is really women and.
Yeah,
right?
I believe we have 10 of the 40 women, and not all of them are interested in what we're interested in.
Well, there's some powerhouses in that Senate, and I love Senator Lucas holding the line, and there's a lot to talk about, but it's definitely great.
Yes, the Twitter queen.
Yeah, she is holding it up. So Senator Marsden, Senator Locke, thank you so much. We'll get back to you. We talk about policy. So glad you're in the room and you agreed to be with us today. Everybody's going to be excited for that discussion. So thank you so much. And looking good in green, Senator. All righty. So next up, I would like to get to my favorite part of the discussion sometimes is with my partner, Spinell Norton, who is our show messenger. And she's also at a place with bad internet.
I am. So can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. And I want my team. So let me just tell everybody in the room today, Robin's on vacation. She went away and left us. And so it's so funny how we're all just like a bunch of, goofballs, but we're doing good so far. We've worked through almost every problem. So we're so excited to have everybody in the room. So let's just get it started. Let's have a little chitty chat, because when I opened up about, just try everything. Some things we see moving in this, where we have some really great policy news with, as we called it, the unbelievable Inflation Reduction Act that passed, the surprise Senate deal, the holy shit, as somebody said to it, actually passed. Some good news there. And then on the other front, we had the PAC Act that failed. And that was really hard to watch. So in the sense of try everything, or where you are now and you're thinking, what's on your mind?
So there are a couple of things on my mind. The very first thing is everything that you just mentioned, but I wanted to talk about polling for just a minute, because I think that's pretty interesting. So one of the things that in regards to polling, they say more than 70% of the folks say the country is on the wrong track. But if you had 53% of the Republicans believing that Donald Trump should be elected again, you think it was on the wrong track too. So I think that when you dig into those polls a little bit, we should be very, very optimistic about the things that we are seeing in terms of the generic polls, but all the issues that people are so passionate about: Roe, voting rights, inflation in terms of who's doing all the real work around it, gun safety. So there are things for us all to be passionate about that will get us out in November. So I'm optimistic.
I am too. And I want to let everybody in the room, I'm really excited. I'm working on getting Swing Left in the room. They're going to be doing a really great event on August 9th with with, his name is Simon Rosenberg, and he is the one that you're talking about, all this great polling that came out. And I'm going to put his Twitter in the link to his Twitter in the chat when I get a chance. And what he is showing is that there's big headwinds, and Democrats are showing, like you said, polling leads. And what he's going to do, this great show with Swing Left, and you guys will be amazed. It will just build that stronger backbone to feel like Democrats are delivering and Democrats are the way to really go, that so much good is coming with this policy, and that we can't believe this hype, you know, and we need to make sure we get our message out about that. So I totally agree with you. And I don't know if anybody, you know, saw the Jon Stewart video yesterday. I mean, it was just heartbreaking. I know we have a veterans in the room. Heidi on our team was really upset yesterday with that news. So one way is to make that try everything to win so big in the fall that we really change these headwinds. So I'm ready. Right?
Yeah, and Catherine, one thing that I would add, and I know Heidi's put it in there, is that there are 41 senators who actually voted against this bill. And I think that with Hal Donahue and Heidi and others, we should just really amplify those names, because many of those folks are in districts that we can win. And so we should talk about that and amplify them so that people will not want to vote for them. That's another thing that's winning our backs.
Yeah, no doubt, you know. So what I'd like to do is to go into the next segment, before we go in the next segment, is to show, if Stair wants to get that ready for me, the segment that's going to set up the whole show about women in policing. In the meantime, while I'm waiting for her to get that on, oh, she already has it on. Look how good. Go ahead.
30. It's part of an initiative called 30 by 30. Proponents tell our Colby Satterfield it's critical not only for diversity, but for public safety as well.
Growing up, I didn't really see that many Hispanic females, or even females in general, doing police work.
Officer Cindy Asagueda.
So I said, I want to be one.
Is a patrol officer for the Fairfax County Police Department, a position that didn't come easy.
I did get a lot of negatives, as into, why are you going to do this job? You know, you're female, you're short, and you can't do it. Why don't you go be a nurse? Why don't you go be a secretary somewhere else and dress differently? And so it got to me.
6 years with a badge, and she's still being hit with criticism.
And so it kind of gave me that strength of continue.
Why she continues to protect the community where her El Salvadorian parents raised her, and why her life experiences shaped her to be the officer she is today.
I have a brother with autism, so part of that is who I am. And so a lot of patience grows from there. There's a lot of repetition. He has his breakdowns. There's ways to approach it, which those skills are unique and personal. So to bring him on the job is very important to me.
A skill Major Wright, one of the department's head female, says is crucial to the job.
90% of police work is just communicating with people, right? We're resolving conflicts, we're problem solving, but we want people to be able to do that with composure and with compassion and under a great deal of stress sometimes.
That's one of the goals of the 30 by 30 initiative, which strives for women to make up 30% of police recruit classes by 2030. Women currently only make up 1 out of every 8 police officers across the country, according to the Department of Justice, and only 3% of chiefs. Some local departments, like Arlington County, are above the average, others just barely. Fairfax County Police is in the middle of the pack. 17% of its officers are women. The research compiled by 30 by 30 and the National Center for Women in Policing shows female officers use less force, are named in fewer complaints and lawsuits, are perceived as being more honest, and see better outcomes for crime victims, especially sexual assault cases.
Because it's female to female, and also I had a sexual assault case that I always say is very sensitive to me. Because the sexual assault portion happened to me a while back.
Officer Asagueda believes opening up about her own experiences puts crime victims at ease and helps move cases forward.
And so having that patience to go through that psychological portion of the female and say, hey, I went through that as well. They feel more like I'm not alone.
Officer Osegueda sees the initiative as the right step forward.
The more positive skills we have within our officers is always good.
Setting the tone for women now, women to come in the entire community they serve. In Fairfax County, Colby Satterfield, WUSA 9.
Oh, good. So this is a great setup with Fennell and Maureen. I'll let you guys take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you. Maureen, I'm so glad you're here. So why shouldn't women just go off and be nurses and work in offices? What is the real advantage of female police officers?
I love that question. And I love that clip. Can I tell you, I hadn't seen that coverage yet. It is fantastic. I'm going to follow up with y'all so we can use it in some of our materials. So, they started to get into some of the research on that clip. And the research is growing. But first and foremost, we know that women officers use less force and excessive force. That's actually the strongest research finding we have. There's a meta-analysis that shows that there's a unique value to women officers and they just police differently. They're named proportionally less in citizen lawsuits and complaints, which also indicates there's cost savings associated with hiring more women officers. We heard about them, performing better in terms of investigations and getting better outcomes for victims of sexual assault. They're perceived by diverse communities as more compassionate and trustworthy. Some things we didn't hear about in that clip, they actually are shown to fire their service weapon less often. They make fewer discretionary arrests for minor misdemeanor offenses. So when we talk about overcriminalization and unnecessarily funneling people into the criminal justice system, women use their discretion more often to find other resolutions other than arrest and jailing people. And also they make fewer stops. When they do make stops, they're actually more likely to find contraband. So when you think about all of the critical issues that are facing policing in this particular moment, there is a really unique value to women officers, and that's why we're so committed to the work. You heard about the underrepresentation. 12% of sworn officers are women, 3% of police leaders are women, and from a gender parity perspective, that's concerning. But from a public safety outcomes perspective, it's absolutely critical that we do something about it. And the reality is, if there was a training out there that offered you all of those outcomes for your officers, right? They'll use less force, they'll have better relationships with the community. Every department in the country would be clamoring to implement that training. But instead, what we're talking about is thinking differently about who we hire and what we value in doing the job.
So then, Maureen, what is the barriers then? So, because we heard the statistics, 3% in leadership positions, and then a little bit more officers. What's the barriers? How do we get past this?
So I think the best way to answer this is to actually walk y'all through the 30 by 30 initiative so that you can see how it is that we're approaching the issues and helping agencies to overcome them. So back in 2018, I was still with the U.S. Department of Justice as an attorney working on mostly criminal justice reform, but a real focus on policing. I was approached by a woman who was a captain in the Newark Police Department, Yvonne Roman. And Yvonne basically pulled a bunch of FOIA requests to identify where she was losing women officers. She was just seeing that she was losing officers through the process. She wanted to know, are we losing officers across the state at these same levels who are promising women applicants? And it turned out there was a huge problem. They were losing women at the physical fitness assessment, which is something that had never been validated to show that it was necessary to do the job well. So Yvonne came to the Department of Justice. It was a point well taken. We launched a national summit at the end of 2018. We brought together 100 different people from across the country, women who are commissioners of major metro departments, all the way down to women who had a few months on the job, researchers, policymakers, experts from other industries who had actually achieved gender parity and used to be male dominated, much like policing. And we uncovered a lot of really concerning things about the profession. And I should note, sometimes when I talk about this, people hear this as if I'm implying that it's intentional, and that's not at all the case. Policing was a profession that was built by and for men, and it's just not surprising that because of that, and it's slow to evolve, it's just not set up to fundamentally support women or people who are non-white in pursuing the profession and succeeding in it. So one of the things we found is that recruitment materials, often, particularly outside of major metro areas, tend to portray a hyper-masculinized version of policing. We heard in that great clip, a lot of what police officers do is talk to people, de-escalate tough situations, and speak with people in oftentimes one of their more stressful moments of their lives, right? But you have these recruitment materials that have things like armored vehicles, SWATs, takedowns, raids, long guns. There was a great story about a small law enforcement agency in the Southeast that had this ridiculous recruitment video of a giant guy hanging out of a helicopter with a giant gun strapped to his chest. This police department had like 10 people. They didn't even have a drone, let alone a helicopter. But that's the kind of recruitment material that we're seeing across the country. And we know very fundamentally, you cannot be what you cannot see. So we really help agencies trying to get accurate with their recruitment materials, start getting accurate about what it is that the job of policing is, and start getting accurate about what we value in terms of the skills and abilities to be a fair and effective police officer. We suspect that when departments start portraying an accurate picture of what policing is and start changing what it is they talk about valuing in a fair and effective officer, you'll naturally see an increase in diversity, not just of women, but of other underrepresented groups as well. We help agencies look at things like assessments. So, you know, I talked about how Yvonne noticed she was losing a lot of women at the physical fitness stage. And that's not to say that physical fitness isn't a part of being a police officer, if for no other reason than the improved mental health benefits of what is an inherently a stressful and traumatic job. But a lot of the types of physical fitness that are assessed, they've just been assessed because that's how they've always done it. And Yvonne has some great quotes. You know, I put cuffs on thousands of people in my career and I've never once dropped to give them 30 before they did it, right? Or like, if you're running 1.5 miles after a suspect, you're doing it wrong. Where's your cruiser and where's your backup, right? Let's absolutely have a physical fitness assessment, but let's make sure that the physical
For now.
I'm here.
All
But I
right.
lost Maureen.
I think she got booted out for a second. Let's see if we can get her back in. Here she comes. All right. It just went so quiet all of a sudden. All right, we got her.
You got her back?
Well, let's see. Yeah, Stare. Here we are, Maureen. I'm going to add you in the spotlight and Stare. Sorry, give us 1 second. Again, it's there you go. Your co-host now. You can unmute.
Oh my goodness. I got
It was,
you know that it was live streamed and then I got kicked out.
boom.
So I think I was talking about physical fitness assessments, right? So
Yes, that's exactly right. Yes.
Are actually needed for somebody to be a fair and effective police officer. Same thing goes for written assessments, psychological assessments. We want to make sure that we're actually testing for the best people to do the job. And most assessments across the country have never been validated to show that that's actually what they're testing for. So we're helping agencies get accurate about what it is that they're testing for. We're also trying to identify micro barriers that exist in the application process. And this is also backed by some evidence. So there was some research done with the FDNY, so not the police department, but analogous first responder situation. And they found that when they removed the $30 application fee, they saw an 80% increase in non-white and women applicants. And so they did some research to really dig in there and try and understand what it was about that fee that was prohibiting people from applying. And, you know, it wasn't that people couldn't afford the $30, but they felt like, I'm not represented in this industry. I'm not represented in this organization. Why would I waste $30, right? It's just not worth it for me. So helping departments figure out what are those micro barriers that have nothing to do with the quality of the applicant and everything to do with the process we put in place. And what can we change to make it more accessible to people who are underrepresented? We're also looking at things around retention. So we know that when we lose women in police departments, more often than not, it happens around the time that they're on patrol and around the time we would expect them to have their first child. So we don't have those exact numbers and data to support it yet. We're working on building the data, but we can assume that part of the problem, and we're also hearing this in our focus groups, is the fact that you just have to choose between your career and your family when it comes to policing, because oftentimes departments are not set up to support parents and caregivers returning to the workplace. You know, shift work is often unstable, but even basic things like a lot of departments don't have a designated space for a nursing mother to pump breast milk. So we were hearing at the summit from women who were having to park their cruisers in the darkest alley they could find in order to pump, or having to go into a public restroom in order to pump there. We're hearing from people, I was just on the call with a chief last week who's a woman who has been in law enforcement for 30 years and has never once had a ballistic resistant vest that fit her appropriately and protected her well, right? And this is a chief, right? So there are all these things that we take for granted as fundamental that just have never been considered because it is such a male-dominated profession. So like I said, there's a perception that, you know, policing is against women, and it's just, they fail to contemplate the specific needs of women because women are so underrepresented. So that's part of our pledge, is helping agencies understand, here's how you provide designated space for nursing. If you're a small agency with limited space, here's some options for you. Here's some manufacturers who prioritize making sure that equipment, uniforms are appropriately fit to the specifications of a woman's body. The other thing we do is try and remove subjectivity in promotional assessments. That's a really big problem. Obviously, you saw 12% of sworn officers, 3% of leaders. So we know we're losing some of them because it's not a profession that supports their needs. But we also know that women aren't applying for promotions as often. And we know that when they do apply, they get them less often. And one of the things we're seeing is that inherent subjectivity in the promotional process. So things like assessing for command presence. Nobody has yet been able to articulate exactly what command presence means to me, but I think we can guess when you hear command presence, what you think it looks like. And it certainly isn't probably sort of a demonstration of the types of de-escalation skills that we heard about in that clip. So we're trying to change that. And then the last thing we're trying to address is agency culture. We did a survey of women who were participating in the 30 by 30 initiative. And we found that even if they had never experienced themselves sexual harassment in their agency, they knew that the harassment process or the harassment adjudication process, if you did report harassment, was subpar at best. Some agencies reported they didn't even know if they had one, right? So ensuring that when sexual harassment does occur, the agency is set up to appropriately support and protect the people that it occurs with, and to appropriately hold people accountable. There's some research out there that shows that women officers experience sexual harassment at a rate of 80% at some point in their career. So we want to make sure that the department is set up to address that and prevent that whenever possible.
So Maureen, let me ask you a question here. So in terms of other industries, how does this compare? So how does this compare to other best practices that you might have learned from other places? And since you guys have started 30 by 30, what differences are you seeing in terms of measurement?
So that's a great question. In terms of how does this compare, we pulled a lot from other industries. So a lot of what I spoke about is actually a reflection of what they said was really important. Industries like medicine, technology, even the military. The military has made great strides in validated assessments to make sure what they're measuring about who joins the military actually reflects what's required in the military of the job. Things like designated nursing spaces, that was listed towards the top as absolutely critical. Other things like stability in work assignments, part-time options for women returning to the workplace after giving birth. And it's not just for women, right? You know, as society evolves, parents, caregivers need flexibility in order to be able to maintain both a work life and a home life. Not forever, right? But knowing that there are times where it's more difficult to maintain both of those simultaneously, and providing alternatives is shown to be increasingly important. You know, the benefit of policing in achieving these types of changes is that most departments are this paramilitary organization. So if you have a chief who's an advocate, who's committed to implementing 30 by 30, we've actually seen improvements really quickly. Washington Post ran a great front page story about one of our chiefs who's a male advocate out in Bellevue, Nebraska, of all places. And he committed to it. It is part of his strategic plan. He is constantly out in the press talking about the unique value of women officers, and he has women officers from other states applying to join his agency because he's being honest about the history of the profession. He's being honest about what it's going to take to meet women's needs, and he's being honest about the unique value of women officers. So it might sound soft, but just a commitment from the top and advocacy from people in positions of leadership to demonstrate the importance of the work has been hugely helpful. The other
Maureen,
oh, go ahead.
Maureen, thank you. One more question for you, because I know our time is running short. So there are 1,800 or something police departments throughout the country, and not really any sort of real leadership at the top in terms of what they do. Based on all the things that you said that make women so good at policing, I mean, really, this is what we need based on all the noise that we hear around all the horrible things that are happening. Did Cory Booker and Tim Scott consider any of these components in terms of trying to reform policing, in terms of what would make our police state so much better than what it is today, which seems simple, and we're women?
So I can't speak to what they consider, but I can share this, right? Like there are a lot of different ways to move the needle on policing in this country. Some of it is through litigation and holding people accountable through lawsuits, right? Some of it is through legislation, either at the state and federal level. But some of it is collaboratively working with departments as they actually exist, meeting them where they are and helping them to voluntarily change. And that's really sort of where we focused. You know, you mentioned there's 18,000 different departments in this country. We have 180 of them participating in this initiative. So everyone from the New York Police Department and LAPD to small and rural departments in every region of the country. And even though there are 180 agencies out of 18,000 participating, in terms of the jurisdiction and the scope, we're reaching a third of the US population. So a third of the US population is being served by an agency is committed to advancing women in policing. So even in the absence of the types of reform that we want to see on a political level, we think there's still space to make a difference sort of on the ground in a very practical and immediate sense.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. I would say sometimes you think about, is it sexy enough? Do women actually want to go and be police officers? There's been a couple of pretty cool shows on TV, but there's maybe opportunity. And I think your 30 by 30 programs, it does work with teenagers, right? To sort of get people interested, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we've got to combat the narrative that policing is a man's job. It simply isn't. And that needs to start early in order to foster enough interest to bring qualified women to the field.
That's awesome. I see Catherine has joined us. Catherine, is there anything that you want to add? This has been great, Maureen.
Yeah, I know we're wrapping up, but I'm interested in the intersectionality of it. You had done a lot on that. If you can speak to that with, I mean, what we know and what we've seen is women do make a change, but when we say about women of color, of diversity, I mean, because obviously white women could be just as racist, right?
Yes.
Like, so there's not just, oh, women, we've learned this, of course, we've seen that, we say, elect more women, but it's women with the value set. So what is your work have shown around that? And then we'll wrap up, because I know we're going to get to Major THEA.
That is such a great question. So intersectionality is the primary lens through which we do all of this work. And I will tell you, the research on this is abysmal. People either measure whether race and ethnicity makes a difference or whether gender makes a difference. And I can tell you from our focus groups and from the conversations we've been having across the country, there's a much more passionate sense of procedural justice and minimizing the impact of the profession when we are talking to people from communities with lived experience. And so part of what we're doing is trying to improve the data collection and the research base to show the even more nuanced, unique value of people who come from impacted communities, because that can't be ignored. And we don't want to imply that gender is a panacea to all of the ills of the police profession.
Muted. No, I think that you summed that up. I think that's a great note to end on. Fennell, thank you. And you came in loud and clear, my friend. So
wonderful.
Yeah, and I'll just add the major up here. And Maureen, thank you again. And I love that your skills, you got yourself right back in the room, Maureen. And thank you for understanding somehow you got kicked out and you didn't even misbehave. So that's good. Continue on this project with the 30 by 30. And I don't know if you guys know each other, but THEA was featured. That's how we found Major THEA PIRNAT. And there's a great video that about you, THEA. So this is so great to have your voice in this conversation. So go ahead and tell us your story. THEA, your background, you call yourself your military background, a military brat, and then you've done a lot of traveling, but your experience and background in domestic violence, let's start there, how you got into this line of work.
Okay, well, Maureen's a tough act to follow, I'm just going to say. But I have 21 years with the Fairfax County Police Department. I grew up a military brat. It's featured in my 30 by 30 video. We want police officers with diverse experience, right? So I grew up all around the world. My father was in military. My mother was actually an emergency room nurse. So I think public service was kind of in my blood, right? It was something I wanted to do. I didn't know how I wanted to apply it. When I went to college, I studied psychology. That's what my undergraduate degree is. During that time frame in college, I did some volunteer work with victims of domestic violence. And I did it out of the police stations where I was going to college. And I got to interact a lot with the police officers and saw the real world experience and opportunities they were having firsthand with survivors of domestic violence. And I realized that was an opportunity, probably more so than maybe going a traditional social work route. So I pursued a role in law enforcement, and I started out as a patrol officer, like every police officer will in this country typically. And then eventually I moved into investigations, where I was a domestic violence detective when it was a brand new position. I advanced from there into child abuse investigations and child exploitation investigations. And that's really where I found my niche. And then later on in my career, I decided I want to go the supervisor route. So I promoted, and eventually I promoted into command rank where I am now. And I've had a great deal of opportunities with the Fairfax County Police Department. We do strive. We signed on to the 30 by 30 initiative last year. I was one of 5 officers they featured in those video series, which you can find on our Facebook page. where we tell all our stories. We're all different. We have different career paths, different points in our career now. But we continue. We've been committed to that 30 by 30 initiative. We've actually had 32% female recruits in the last 3 police academies. That includes graduates. So it's not just getting them in the door. We have to get them on the street, right? And part of our police department. And currently, I know we talked about 3% of police chiefs being female. 19% of the Fairfax County Police Department's command staff is female. So we are continuing to have that representation. And we do it through a number of different ways, obviously. We're holding a recruiting event August 20th, just for females to come out. I can put the invite in the chat and they get a chance to see what the physical assessment test is about, talk to some of our police academy instructors, talk to our recruiters, learn more about the police department. Like, we are targeting these diverse audiences or diverse candidates for our police department. Next week, we are hosting a Future Women in Law Enforcement Police Academy for teens. Or I'm sorry, let me back it up. A Future Women Leaders in Law Enforcement. Like, we don't just want to recruit you to be a police officer. We want to recruit you to be a future leader on our police agency. And we have other teen police academies and other things that we're doing to target the youth and target more diverse communities and get those future generation of police officers through the doors.
No, it's great. And for those that just joined, this is Major THEA PIRNAT, you're the commander of the Fairfax County Police Department's Research Management Bureau. And over 20 some years, you said in background in this service, and that you call a calling, that this is really to do this kind of work is not somebody just goes into lightly. So talk a little bit about that, this calling, and also maybe what you bring to it or what you feel when you've talked about having more women, what the unique skill set is when we do talk about why this makes somewhat of a difference when representation matters.
And I say this in my 30 by 30 video, that the diversity that we are trying to achieve in police work is not just about the appearance of our police department. Like, we know that's going to bring a little more trust to the community, but it really is about the diversity of thought. As we talk about police reform, we need to have more dialogue at the table and different perspectives, which is something that both women and other diverse candidates are going to bring, that we've kind of been lacking traditionally in law enforcement, and we continue to strive there. But that's important. But this is not just a job. It is a profession. It is a calling. You're going to give more than you're going to take. In all honesty, I know Maureen referenced some of the shift issues. That is a significant complication for a lot of our officers, both female and male, because daycares typically aren't open when we have to start or conclude our shifts. So we have to find alternative ways for childcare, which is a huge hurdle for some of our recruiting, especially with women. So those are one of the things. We work holidays, we work weekends, we work nights. There's a lot that goes into this profession, and you're going to see people at their worst. They're going to be in a moment of crisis, physically, emotionally. Women do a great job in those situations. We're naturally caregivers, right? We're just nurturing by nature, which is why women tend to find themselves in public service fields like nursing and teaching. And I think it's been overlooked that law enforcement is a public service field that women do belong in. And so that's what we're trying to tap in. And that's why this is important. Our motto for our recruiting is answer the call. Join fcpt.org, right. Answer the call, because it is a calling. This is something, it's rewarding. You're going to make a commitment in other people's lives and helping them. And it's not like any other paycheck you're going to receive.
Right. You know, in some of these articles and documentaries across the country about women in blue, they do talk about that unique skill set. And, you know, sometimes you just hate to like stereotype women all in that obviously skill set, but using the communication, those skills, and then those skills of building that community, you know, really reaching out and having people in that community see you. You talked about what you bring to that when you go out and young girls do see you in this role, how important that is.
Yeah, I think it was referenced earlier. You can't be what you don't see, right? So we need to see other women in other roles. And it is fun to go out there and engage with little kids that are young girls and young boys too. But young girls, like they don't get to see that. I didn't get to see that growing up. Right. And even when I first came on the police department, we didn't have the 17% we have now. It was probably closer to 10%. I often worked on a patrol squad where I was the only female. And so that was, you know, that can be isolating, that can be lonely. And that's one of those barriers that we're trying to overcome with our increased recruitment of women.
Yeah. Well, I would assume if there's any more challenges to speak of, I know when we hear about women being in the Senate or different places, the bathroom, probably Mamie Locke, Senator Locke will be able to talk to that. Some of the stuff is not set up to have women. And we talk about that with even your gear, right? You've referenced that.
Yeah, so it's still a struggle. I'm actually in charge of our uniform section now. So we're looking at new options. Every vendor knows that we work with, don't bring me a uniform unless you have it in female cut and female designs, and they're doing better. It's something I think we're still going to progress on, but all the uniforms are traditionally, you know, male oriented and kind of women are an afterthought, right? That's what the vendors have designed. That's what the departments have purchased over, 50 years, right? So we're evolving in that. The vendors know they have to evolve with us or we're not buying their products. So but it is the ballistic vest. I heard you that referenced earlier. That's been an issue. Same thing. I'm exploring different ballistic vest options. We're testing and evaluating several right now. And I make sure that I have a large female population as part of all those test and evaluation groups for our pants, for our shirts, for our ballistic vest.
Right.
Because it's something like that, then it may not seem significant to someone else, but it is significant to feeling like you belong here, right? You should feel comfortable. And when you come to work, that you're not wearing something that you feel like your dad should be wearing or someone else.
Well,
should
you have to be able to move quickly. I played basketball. One thing when you they did make different than the ball sizes for women's teams. It made such a difference in how you can handle the ball. I would think that making sure you have the right equipment, meaning you can really do your job well and not trip over yourself or something. So yeah, I love it. I love that you came here to talk about this. And I also, just for the room's knowledge, I also tried to reach out to some other departments because we're lucky in Virginia, Newport News, even Mount Vernon. There is such a diverse set of women that could have come on today too. And we're lucky to have you and have your time. And hopefully, you'll continue at this job and recruit more women. Is there any last takeaways before you end your segment today that you'd like to depart to the room?
I would just say, make sure that you're encouraging women, no matter what they choose to do. I was surprised when I had my children, how many women came up to me and asked me what my childcare situation was going to be. And when I shared it, I actually got shamed a little bit that I was not choosing to stay home with my kids. And I think that's horrible for any profession. Like, women should support other women, obviously, regardless of the choices they make, especially in occupation. So you heard the officer, Esagueda, explain that she did get some pushback, unfortunately.
Right.
Oh, don't do that. Like, support women no matter what their profession is. That's going to help us get more women in this profession where we need women.
Yeah, it happens everywhere, right? I think it's not just in policing, but the one thing that caught my attention was look, we're lucky you're in Fairfax County, right? And the benefits you have and be able to go on leave and raise your children. So there is a flexibility in this job.
Oh, yes, we have job share. I know that was referenced. We have some job share opportunities. We are fortunate. We have a lot of specialty positions that don't have the traditional patrol shift hours. So, we have a ton of school resource officers are a little more traditional Monday through Friday jobs, but crime prevention officers. So there's opportunities there for folks that need to do something besides patrol at some point in their career.
Right.
So, and we do have a lot of leave opportunities for maternity leave, your job's guaranteed. So, and we have those lactation rooms. I heard the reference. We didn't always, we do now. And that's important.
That's important, definitely. Well, thank you, Major THEA PIRNAT, for being here today. I hope other people in the room, who knows, we may have some people that are thinking about this line of work. It's so important. And I'm glad that we'll have the senators here to talk about policy. But before we get to them, I am going to do a little bit of a commercial on the Women's Summit. So thank you, THEA, for being here. We appreciate your time and we hope that you'll tune into the Power Lunch. It's a great place to be. So thank you very much. All right, so that was interesting and so enlightening. I have to say that when the senator brought this topic up, I was thinking there's so much to talk about this, and I'm sure that Senator Locke has a lot on her mind with this and the long history she has. But what I want to do talk right now is about the Women's Summit, and I'm going to bring up our friend that is going to be part of. Hold on one second. Lindley Thorne, the political director of the Ground Game, all the way from Harrisonburg. How are you doing, Lindley?
Hey, Catherine, how are you? Good to see you. Hi for now. I owe you a call.
Well, I want, what's exciting next, I have on my thing, the next stop for the Women's Summit. And if you're new to the room and new to the politics around the Women's Summit, we've been doing this event every year since 2017. And we have partnered with the Rural Ground Game because we've learned that we're one district and we have to make sure that we are working with our rural brothers and sisters. So let's talk about what we're going to, when we come out there on August 12th and 13th, we talked about yesterday some of what we really want to focus on. Why don't you talk a little bit about what we're going to be talking about out in rural? area in Shenandoah.
Yeah. So thanks to everyone like Stair and everyone who sent their best wishes for the event that we had last Sunday here at my farm, highlighting our 4 congressional challenger candidates who are the Democratic nominees. So Herb Jones, Josh Throneberg, Jennifer Lewis, and Tasha Devon. We were really grateful that we could be joined by delegates David Reed, Danica Rome, Sally Hudson. We would have had Dan Helmer, but he took a wrong turn and hilariously ended up in a different area. So we're going to catch
Eastern
up.
Shore. He went to the ocean. We better just cut this out of the recording.
Yeah, I don't know if we were supposed to say that publicly, but hilarious. And we will do something with Dan very soon. But something that we talked about Sunday and that we always talk about is rural Democrats, because our work is a little bit different. A lot of what we have to do is kind of seed the ground on our values as Democrats and some of the policy pieces that lead us based on our shared values. And one of the very simple things that we're trying to provide is kind of a tapestry of messaging that rural Democrats can lean into no matter where they are in the Commonwealth. So what that might look like is asserting ourselves as just being good neighbors. When we're in a moment where we are politically divided, being a good neighbor sounds like a really nice, easy thing that is hard to disagree with. But when we say being a good neighbor, that needs to come with some teeth. That means that we're talking about fair wages. We're talking about care for seniors. We're talking about funding our public schools. These are all things that any Democratic candidate is very likely to pick up and run with it when they're out on the campaign trail. This is some work that we're definitely talking about in Elaine Luria's district this year, in Abigail Spanberger's district, but also really wanting to be very mindful that Democrats in rural communities have a critical role to play next year when the whole country looks to Virginia for some kind of bellwether signal of hope, that Democrats actually have an effective message for rural communities and that we are chipping away at the margins that we saw go against our favor last year, making sure that we are showing up everywhere. So that's some of what we'll be talking about at the Women's Summit around public education, talking with former candidates, future candidates. We'll be talking about how to tell your personal story and showing people a number of different ways that we're going to be there to support them in getting that out to community.
Yes, I love it. So thank you, Lindley. I think that's really important because we are learning this and we're trying to make sure that our state really works together to be all in to win. And so join us. We'll put the links in the chat about, we'll be out at the brewery August 12th, and then we'll be right outside Wintergreen at the Bull Rock Cider Brewery that afternoon on Saturday. All right, Lindley, go back to your farm. I'm glad you came out and took care of those sheep and chickens and everybody. Say hi to kiss the chicken or the duck, whoever's sitting outside the door over there.
I will do that. Somebody said that chicken that was very active in our event needed to have a little Josh Hawley name tag. So we might consider.
He ran, huh?
It was running around. So
I love it. Thank you, Lindley. Thank you for staying in the room with us. We hope to see you in the after chat. All right, I want to get right to it because we need to get into the policy piece of this, and I am going to highlight bring in Senator Mamie Locke. Hello, Senator. Thank you for being patient. I hope you enjoyed what you're hearing, and I think you'll probably have a lot to add to it. And let me get Senator, sorry. Usually we have our teammate doing all this kind of clicking. So let's just start right out of the bat. What are your thoughts on this, Senator Mamie Locke, when we talk about representation matters and then your work in reform around this subject?
Absolutely, representation matters. It's very important that we, have representation at all levels. And one of the things that Maureen talked about that struck me right away was accuracy in promoting, because that was one of the things that we put in our policy piece, because one of the things that came in the omnibus bill had to do with having our police departments look like armed camps. And that became a factor because if your citizens are going to think that the police department is going to be an armed camp against them when they're supposed to be there to serve and protect, then that already is a barrier between their vision of what the department is supposed to be And in interacting with the citizen, particularly Black and brown people, we already have a problem. If the police department is acting like the military, with the riot gear and with the tanks and with all of this equipment that they see as, why is our department looking like something other than a police force? So that became a piece of the criminal justice and racial equity agenda that we put forth. And one of the other issues was we began to get a lot of criticism out of this because it was, oh, well, you're overreacting, you're trying to do something relative to, reform, when what happened to George Floyd was in Minnesota. What happened to Ahmaud Arbery was in Georgia. What happened to Breonna Taylor was in Kentucky. And then, of course, a lot of stuff began to surface about excessive force that had happened in Virginia. So, our response was, this has nothing to do with whether or not something happened 1,300 miles away. We have to also look at what is happening, in our own backyard. And we didn't do this in isolation. We collaborated with the Virginia Sheriff's Association and the chiefs of police and the Capitol Police and the state police, asking for their input. What would you like to see change? What are your concerns? We also had a series of community forums across the state asking for citizen input. What are your concerns? What are your issues? What do you want to see changed? And it is out of that before we even introduced anything. Because we wanted to have everybody's input before we introduced anything. And we also wanted people to know in 2020, this was not the first time we had introduced any legislation. We had introduced legislation dealing with prohibiting the hiring of police officers who had been fired from a police department before. We had introduced that before. It simply hadn't gone anywhere. We had introduced legislation about decertification before. It simply hadn't gone anywhere. So this wasn't the first time, we had introduced these kinds of bills. It simply hadn't gone anywhere because we couldn't get a hearing, in courts of justice, but in 2020, we had, finally gotten to a majority in both the House and the Senate, so we can get a hearing on these pieces of legislation. So the omnibus bill that I carried, and there were other pieces as well, did several things. It was a very ambitious package that prohibited no-knock warrants, that also banned sex with individuals who had been arrested by law enforcement. It prohibited the hiring of officers fired or resigned during the use of force investigations. It expanded decertification procedures for law enforcement officers. And I want to stop right there. That is the piece of legislation that we have gotten more comments from law enforcement than any other piece of legislation, where they said, thank you for doing this, because our hands have been tied from trying to decertify an officer who had done bad things, and we could not do anything about it. So as a consequence of that piece of loan, there have been any number of officers who've been able to be decertified as a result of being a bad actor.
No, I think that's really important, like you said. I mean, it's amazing. We saw that passed in 2020, that whole package, and so important. And it does help. It helps the officers do their work. And I think that was the way to do it, get everybody at the table. Unfortunately, at the federal level, you saw that everything at the table, but there was not the will to just
get it done.
Get it done. It was really a shameful thing that we see happening up there on this policy. Well, let's hear from Senator Marsden. He prefaced, of those who weren't in the room early on, his extensive background, with the juvenile center and so on. So Senator, if you want to unmute yourself and chime in on this, I'm so glad you brought this topic for us to talk about today. So why don't you give us, are you able to unmute? Let's hear from you, what your point of view on this reform or your experience with policing and improvements.
Well, thank you. I've been around since coming on as a probation officer in 1970 and starting to see the changes. In 1970, female probation officers weren't allowed to have male probationers. They were restricted to female probationers. Male probationers were allowed to have female probationers. It was a very, very different world. And watching it change has just been fascinating. And getting into management in 1979, when I ran the less secure shelter for kids with home problems, and then the detention center for 17 years, watching the advances made by women in the corrections profession, which is very similar in some respects to police. A lot of shift work, a lot of culture that's been in place for years and years and years. One thing I do want to mention is that many of the policing agencies in Virginia are sheriff's departments, and they're very, very different than police departments. Sometimes you don't find the standards that you would like. Sometimes you find that you serve more at the pleasure of the sheriff than you do under civil service protection. And so those are some of our greater challenges there. But we've always, I know in corrections, since I've been there, I've always resisted the militarization of corrections and shaken my head at at what has taken place in the early days in my early career with the federal government trying to make tanks available to police departments.
Right.
I always resisted spit shields and restraint chairs and pepper spray because of the opportunities for misuse.
Right.
And we need to shift, and policing has shifted, I think, away from teaching people lessons to problem solving. And this has been the big difference in corrections and how we deal with who we decide to lock up. And people have different experiences with men and women in their lives, with their parents, with their relatives, and their community. And people relate very often better to a female professional. Right. Sometimes that they will feel more comfortable with a male professional, but providing in a diverse society, we need to provide people who look like others, who have similar backgrounds to others, so that they can seek out the problem solving that we're trying to do, and not just look out toward police as teaching you a lesson. We had 1,500 kids in corrections in Virginia in 1997, and today we're under 200. We have 1,440 juvenile detention beds. We're at less than 300 today. We've made tremendous strides in keeping people out, supervising in the community.
Right.
And in Fairfax County, we actually have a program where officers on their own discretion can decide not to go to juvenile court with a case, but to take it before mediation for that kind of assistance. Problem solving is the key to our future, not lesson teaching. And yes. It has just been a remarkable change to watch over the years. And the last thing I would say is that women getting into policing need to be their authentic selves, not trying to emulate the male culture, right. Not trying to fit in, be who you are. That's how you'll be successful. Those were the best female police officers I ever worked with.
Right. And, we try to get Sheriff Kincaid here today. And I know, speaking of sheriffs, and I know we have people from Virginia Beach in this room, the sheriff's departments can be problematic. And so Mamie Locke, Senator, I'd like to have your input on that. I think about the history of Virginia. I think about the history of policing. I think about that we still have a bad reputation in Virginia with our jails. I'll have to say, we still need so much improvement, and I think we've had some mental health investments maybe in this last budget.
Yes.
Speak a little bit about that. I mean, we still see, what are the problematic things you're seeing? And I do see this pushback now. Everybody wants to talk about, we need more law enforcement. That's the big thing in this election, is this pushback against reform and wanting more, law enforcement now to solve these problems where people are talking about more crime and so on.
I mean, I think part of the problem is not that we don't need law enforcement, and the whole thing about defund the police and all of that was talked a lot about while we were going through this process. Mm-hmm. Not once did you hear from Democrats in the Senate or the House to fund the police. You only heard that from Republicans. Right. And it was being used as a smokescreen for the process that we were going through. Our issue was we need good policing, and good law enforcement. And that what we don't need are, bad officers out there who were using their badge as a way, to criminalize the process. And what is generally happening in a lot of departments, is, were bad things that were being covered up. And that was what we need to get rid of. And some of our sheriffs, and fortunately, in my district, I have some good sheriffs. I have one that, not so good. And what I hear from them is that one of the major problems that they're having is having to put in their jails individuals that shouldn't be there. And a lot of that has to be with the mental health system. And that they're having to, place in their jails individuals who have mental health problems because there's no bed capacity in mental health facilities.
Right.
And that has become a real problem. So what we try to do is to find the resources necessary in the budget to try to alleviate that issue. Unfortunately, we didn't have enough resources to try to help them move as many of the folks that are in their jails out of the jails into the facilities needed, because there's not enough bed space.
Right.
In mental health facilities to move people from jails to facilities.
Well, can I interrupt real quick? You make me think of an article a couple months ago where sheriffs in Virginia made an outcry saying, that they need help. They are housing they're becoming the house for mental health patients.
Right.
And I don't know what was your response in policy with that? I don't know what movement happened with this issue. Senator, either Marsden or you, yeah.
I think what we tried to do was to move resources into creating bed spaces, in mental health facilities, so that would help alleviate the problems that the jails were having. There was some movement, but unfortunately not enough.
Right. Senator Marsden, do you have any input on that?
Well, it is these kinds of changes. I will say one thing about policing in general, and it's the same thing to a certain extent with corrections. You are dealing with people in the very worst moments of their lives. And we assume that that's who these people are, and they're not. They're going through a crisis. They're going through mental health problems. And we do have a mental health crisis in Virginia. We cannot fund. Well, we can fund, but we cannot fill all the positions that we have in our mental health facilities. I'm looking right now, I'm running a commission on the possibility of consolidating a number of our juvenile detention centers because we have so few kids in them. I have one facility that's costing over $800,000 per occupied bed.
Oh my God.
Simply because we have so few kids. And so to consolidate that overhead and what have you, and to be able to create stronger programs for children, is very important. But that is the key. And one of the problems we have, I think, is that every time we have some kind of a crisis in this country, people are running out and buying guns. And they're buying guns that are way beyond what anyone would ever need for self-protection.
Exactly.
And I think we're putting our police officers in a situation
Dangerous.
where they never know whether they're going to be confronting a situation where they're going to be outgunned by somebody who's going through one of those bad moments.
You're right.
Richmond had a situation about a year and a half ago, and they still have the problem. I talked with LeVar Stoney, the mayor, where we have a law in Virginia that allows you to secure a gun in an automobile, which means just in the door slot in your beside you, or the little compartment between the two front seats, and they're not locked. And they had 200 guns in 1 month stolen out of cars. Now these guns are not going into good hands. Police know this,
right?
And it puts us at odds. So the whole idea of self-protection And the Second Amendment feeds into some of the overreactions that I think you find in police officers, and it creates that fear out there. We need to go in a different direction.
Yeah,
And
I agree.
that is a key thing for going forward.
Yeah, I agree. And we will get wrapped up. I know we're after we're at 1:07, but it was such a great conversation. And Mamie Locke, thank you so much, Senator Locke. I hope to work with you again and have you back on, because I think there's so much here to talk about from mental health, from our jails, right? Did you have any last words? And then we will wrap up.
Oh, absolutely. Because I was reading one of the comments where someone said that a lot of the folks who are even in the jails haven't even committed a crime.
Right.
And they're simply there because of some mental breakdown. And they're on the streets, and they simply are picked up, and put in jails. And I think that this is a crisis that we ultimately will have to deal with.
Yes.
And we simply have to generate the resources to deal with it. And I'll be at the Women's Summit in Hampton Roads.
Yes, you will. Yay. All right. I love that ending. That's so good. So thank you guys so much. It really was. There was so much to unpack there. Thank you, Senator Locke and Senator Marsden. And special thank you to bringing this topic up. We appreciate it, Senator. All right. Favorite time of the show. We're getting into the part where we are going to go to the after chat and wrap things up. I want to make sure that I say thank you to all of our guests today that came on. It was a great lineup. And if you had a delay getting in the room, we're sorry about that. We hope that now you're here with us, and that's great. But thank you to Senator Marsden, Senator Locke, and the Major THEA PIRNAT. Thank you so much for being here. And the Director of Strategic Initiatives, a Policing Project, MAUREEN MCGOUGH. And thank you to the team, Stair Calhoun, Ambassador Buzz, Heidi Dragnoff is here today, our Twitter guru, Vanell Norton, our show messenger, and also we have today Michelle McKinney, chat liaison, and thank you also to our content concierges, Julie Galdo and Sally Renholt. And remember to follow us on social media. And I don't want to leave the show with saying, support us. Become a Patreon. Just for a cup of coffee or a little bit more, you can make sure that us women are represented and do this kind of work every week. We love bringing it to you. So next week, I'm really excited that we will have on Delegate Marcus Simon to talk all about voting and some other great guests. So we hope you tune into next Friday. And Stair, if you want to roll credits, we will go into the after chat to about 1:30 today. So stay tuned. We hope to see you next week, and lots of love. Let's go. Bye-bye, Facebook. We made it. I don't know, Heidi, how do you think we did without Robin?
Smooth.